Hello friends, welcome! Well, now we have Blender 3.5 with some awesome new features. And in this video we are going to use some of these new nodes to make a procedural fluffy rock. And I'm going to explain these nodes as much as I can. So please stay with me. Okay friends, here is the scene. Now let me delete everything and make a simple plane. And after selecting that, we go in the curve, empty hair. Okay, now we have the curves, empty hair as a child of my plane, and I go to the geometry nodes to make my rock base. Not in curves, of course, first in the plane I want to do this. Now I want to make a grid, primitive grid, and the object I want to make is this grid. I just ignore the plane, or any object, doesn't matter. For the size, I want the size of the grid to be a proportion of my image. So let me bring the image info node. Well, this is a new node in Blender 3.5. And I want to open an image, this one. Well, the width and height of this image info is pixels, the resolution of the image. And I want a meter value for this grid. So first let me bring a value in here, set this on 1, and I want a ratio of my width and height, so I divide them. And now that I have the ratio, the width per height, I can multiply this by the height value to get the width. So if this value is my height value and I connect this to the y, I can multiply this value by the ratio. I can have my width, and connecting this to the x value. Now this is my scale. Let me use it in the input. And call it a scale. Set this to 1.5. Okay. Now let me first make the shader in here and call it rock base. And set the material in here. Okay, now we go into the shader editor and bring the image, texture. Okay, load the image and connecting this to the shader and going to the material preview, and we see nothing. That's because of this image. It needs a vector, a UV map, and our object doesn't have a UV map. Of course it does, but we didn't define it as an attribute. So I store it as attribute and set this to vector UV map and call it my UV. And by hovering on this, you can press Ctrl C to copy and go to the shader, and in here bring an attribute, Ctrl V to paste, and connect the vector to the vector, and now I have my image. And you can see that the ratio of the dimension of my plane is exactly the same as the ratio of my image. And let me show you something. If I swap these two values, of course in this new version you can swap them by holding Alt, and yeah, I lost my image proper dimensions. So if you had such situations, just swap these two values by holding Alt and release. Now you might say, okay, I don't want my plane ratio to be exactly as the same ratio of my image. You can change the ratio by multiplying this and connecting this to the last multiply, and you can change it like this in here. And I want to keep this ratio, so I set the number to 1. Now I want to go on and make the plane. Let me go to the solid view, and I want to give a solidify modifier to this, 0.008 as thickness, and after that a bevel modifier, 0.003, and 2 segments. Okay. If I want to shade the smooth, I can just right click and shade the smooth. It won't have any effect because in the geometry nodes we made this object, and we should set this shade smooth in here. Now it's smooth. And of course in the grid I only need 2 vertices in each direction. And in here I just need to copy this, Control C, and into the curves. I don't need this node, and paste them. I need to make a route in here and connect this to Y and to the input. Call it a scale, and this scale should be exactly the same as the plane scale we have in here, 1.5 and 1.5 either in here. Now you can turn off the plane. Okay. Now in this part I want to generate some curves. So I'm going to the hair, the new section, generation, and generate hair curves. Well, you can see that the length is too much, and I want the length to be 2.5 centimeters. It means it should be 0.025. Okay. And of course from this part it's about your choices. You can make your own rug by playing with the values, and please play with them to see how changing the value will affect your object. And by playing this stuff you can learn how things are working in here. Now in this node you can see that we have 2 outputs, first geometry and the second is curve. Well, the first one is keeping my base geometry, which is grid, and also adds the curve to it, but since I already have the plane, I don't need the plane under this, I only need the curves. But you can see that we could have both the planes and the curves in here. I didn't need the plane, but since we still don't have the bevel node in the geometry node, I made it separately to have an optimized object. Of course I could make it with subdivision surface node, but it will give me so many extra unneeded segments and it is not optimized, so I prefer to do this in this way. I want to just use the curves output and turn on the plane, and I can in here change the control points and the density. I want to connect the density to the input, and also the viewport amount. Well, you know that the viewport amount is just a percentage of my total density, which we can see in the viewport, and you can keep the density in the render. Just for having a better performance in your viewport, you can give a lower percentage. I set this to 2000 for now, and yeah. Also I can give the material, so first let me make it. And in here, rock fair, I select. Okay. And you can also give a density map by an image to this node in this part. I don't need that for now. I mean, for this project. And now in here, I want to give my curves color of my image. So I need the image texture, and I want to give it image, but instead of just loading the image both in this node and in this image info node, I can use an image input, going into the input and constant image. I can load it in here and connecting this image to this one and this one. Now I want to use this as an attribute, so store name attribute, color, and connect this to the color. And if you remember, it also needs a UV map as vector. So since we already have the vector in here, the UV map, I can simply connect this to here and call it image. Control C to copy and going to the shader and bring in attribute, paste, image. Let me check. Let me turn off the plane. Yes, let me now increase the density. Okay, you can see now my curves are following the color of the image. And in here, let me give roughness 0.8 and a little bit of sheen 0.5. I also want this to look a little bit like a silk, so I give a little bit of metalness 0.24, and since I increase the roughness to 0.8, I want to use the multi-scatter GGX. Okay, also let me change this plane material, reducing the specular of this because it's under the curve, so let me fake it 0.8 and sheen 0.5 and turn on the plane. Okay, now let me show you something else. In the curves, going to the geometry node, I need to set a shape for seeing the shape of my curve, how it will look in the render. Let me go to the render setting, curves. I can set this to strip, and especially for the hair, you might need a little bit additional subdivisions. You can see that it's just a simple shape. I can give it my custom shape, hair, right, set hair, curve profile. Now let me reduce the density to 4000, 2000. Okay. Well, the radius is too much. I want to set it on 0.0008. Okay. Well, the shape in this node, pretty simple. When the shape is on 0.5, it's something like this. The radius, I have the full radius at the beginning and 0 at the tip. And when it's on 0, you can see in here, it's completely constant. And when it's on minus 0.5, it's exactly opposite of this, something like this. Okay, but when I increase the number from 0.5 to, for example, 0.8, instead of this shape, I will have such shape. Okay, you can see in here. And instead of using this, you can set this to 0.5 and change these two parameters. I can change the tip like to 1 to have a constant radius along my curve, and or reduce this, or reduce the starting point. You can see it's pretty simple. And since in here our curves is just a piece of cotton string, So the radius is almost constant along the curve. So I want to set this to 0.1. And here is my nodes. Okay, I want to keep the thing simple. I want to move to a new geometry node for shaping my curves. Let me give more density, 4000. Okay, now in here I want to give it a noise texture. Going to the hair deformation and hair curve noise. Okay. Well, we have some parameters in here, and you can see that some of the curves are longer and some of them are smaller. That's because this node is using a set position node. This node. Well, and this node is working on the points and doesn't care about the curve length, so it's just using the noise texture and moving the points to some positions. So for keeping the lengths, I can enable this option, preserve length. Now I have my length. And this option I'm going to explain it at the last step, and the factor will be pretty obvious. When the factor is 0, we have no effect at all, and the 1 is full effect. And the distance, well, let me turn this off. Well, you can see that simply when I increase the distance, the points move to the farther positions. And in here I want to keep it like 0.01 and turn this option. We have the shape. Almost in all the nodes, all these hair nodes, we have the shape option. And it means that if this is our curve, when my shape value is 0.5, it means that it's like a color ramp. At the beginning, at the starting point, I have 0 effect, and at the tip, I have my full effect. It's like this. And when the shape is 0, it means I have the full effect from the beginning to the end. Something like this. And when it's minus 0.5, it's actually the opposite of this one. Okay, it's like changing these two colors, swapping these two values. And for example, if you want to have more power of this effect in the beginning, you can, instead of using 0.5, you can decrease the number to something like 0.2. But in here I want to keep it 0.5. And we have two scales. The first scale is the scale of noise along my surface. Well, you can see if I decrease this number to something like 0.5, I should have a larger pattern. And when I increase this number, I should have a smaller pattern, like 5. Okay. You can see the patterns are so much smaller. And in here, first I want to make a large noise, so I want to set it to 0.7, something like this. And of course it depends on you. All these parameters are for you to play with and make your own object. And the second scale is the scale along my curve. When the number is lower, it means that I should have larger pattern along my curve, something like this. But when I increase the number, I should have a smaller pattern or higher frequency. And in here, let me show you from the close view. I want to increase the scale along my curve. You can see that it's starting to have more frequency. I want to keep this at 20. Okay, you can see I have these S curves like this in here. And the offset per curve, well, it gives some random offset value for each individual curve. And if I increase this number, I will gradually lose my pattern, lose my noise pattern, because it's giving the curves some random values. Okay. I want to set this to a small value, like 0.005. I don't know if it changed this at all. 0.05. Okay. And the cumulative offset. Well, when this option is enabled, if this is my curve, and I have multiple points on it, and in here my noise texture is giving some values to these points. So for example, if these are my points, and all of them are in this direction, and when this option is on, it's like this, that my point will move to the right position by 0.1, and the second one, since it's cumulative, it should be added to the previous one, so it should be 0.2 plus 0.1 means 0.3. And the third one should be also added to the previous cumulative number, so 0.1 plus 0.2 plus 0.1 means 0.4. It should move to the 0.4 position. But if I turn off this option, there is no adding stuff in here, so the first one should move to the 0.1 position, and the second one should move to the 0.2 position instead of 0.3. And this third one, instead of 0.4, should move to the 0.1 position, again, like this. Okay, there is no accumulation in here. And for the next step, I'm going to use the same hair curves noise because I want to add a little bit of noises with a smaller pattern this time. And I want to set the distance to 0.004, and the scale along my surface should be 2, and I want to keep the second scale to the 1. And I forgot to turn this on. I also want to change the seed because I want a new noise texture, like 5. Okay, let me turn this off and on. You can see I added some smaller noise to my curves. Okay, and for the next step, I'm going to use an important node, which is going to the hair, guides, and clump hair curves. With this node, I can clump my hairs. Well, we have some options in here. These are important options. First, we have guide. Well, what is guide? Well, if it is my guide curve, the other curves around it are clumped onto this guide curve. Something like this. This is the main one in the middle is my guide curve. So in here you can see these clump curves. In the middle of them there are guide curves. And how can I make these guides? We have two options in here. Let me make it bigger. We have two important options in here, guide distance and guide mask, which are working together. The guide mask is between 0 and 1, and when the guide mask is 1, it means that all of my existing curves can potentially be a guide curve. But when I reduce this to something like 0.1, it means that only 10% of my curves could be selected as a guide curve, and this selection is randomly. And the guide distance, for example, if I set it to 0.02, and I have my two curves in here and some curves in the middle. This is the distance between these two curves. For instance, in here, if the distance between these two curves is 0.02 or anything more than that, these two curves are eligible to be selected as guide curves. Okay, but if the distance between them is less than 0.02, which I set in here, it means that these two curves couldn't be selected as guides ever. So if you want to make sure that you have a lower amount of guide curves, first decrease this number to something like 0.2 or 0.1, and after that, for changing the size of your clump curves, you can play with the guide distance. And of course, these numbers are dependent on the density of the curve quantity, the total curve quantity in here, because, for example, it's getting the 10% of my existing curves. When I increase my curve density, it means that it's a 10% of a larger value. So my total guide curve number will increase either. And here I want to set the distance to 0.002 to have a small clumping size. And well, the factor is obviously is a factor of the effect. 0 means no clumping at all, and the 1 is full clumping effect. And the shape is exactly like the noise node. When we have something like this, it means that we have the 0 effect at the beginning, at the starting point of my curve, and I have the full effect of this clumping at the tip. And if I reduce this shape, it means that I will have more power in the beginning part. And in here, I don't want this shape. I want the clumping shape to be something like this. Well, when the shape is on 0, it means that I have the full effect from the beginning to the end, as we had in the noise texture. So if I want to have more power of this clumping effect at the beginning part like this, at this part, I should decrease this number to something like 0.15. You can see in here, let me change it again. It was 0.5 and 0.15. Now I have more power in the beginning part. And the next option I have tip spread, which means I can spread the tips instead of being in one point. I want to increase it a little bit, 0.005, 0.003, no, 5 is okay, I think. And the clump offset, well, it will move each clumped curve randomly to a direction. And let me set it to 0.002. Okay, and distance fall off. Well, these are two parameters that it's better for you to see in different positions, different projects, to see how it will work for you. And you can see that if I increase this fall off, well, it begins from a very small amount, like 0.001. This is my fall off, and when I increase this number, I will go to my clumping effect. Okay. And here I want to set this on, let me say 0.06, 0.08. And you can see that all of my curves in here are clumped, and I don't want that. I want some of them to be clumped and some of them have less effect. So I'm going to use random value. And in here I wanted some random values for each curve, not for each points. So I should use, in here come to the hair and then read curve info. Okay. I want to use the curve index in here, not the curve ID. I don't know if the curve ID has some negative values, so I want to stick with this curve index. And by the way, you can press the Ctrl H to toggle the view like this. And I also want to change the seed to anything other than 0. The 0 is a little bit buggy for me. And I want to give a little bit more contrast to this. Let me show you first. In here, I want the black curves to pop up a little bit more. So I can use map range or color ramp. In these new nodes, if you look into them, you might see this map range quite often. I want to set this from min to 0.2. It's like a color ramp. Let me show you. It's like sliding this value to 0.2 position. Okay, now if I change this number to, for example, 0.5, it's like changing the color of this black one from min, means the first one, to 0.5. And if I connect this to the viewer, I should have the same value. You can see they are exactly the same. I want to keep this 0. Okay. Now let me connect this to the factor and you will see what will happen in here. Okay, you can see, and some of them are clumped, some of them are not clumped, or some of them with a lower effect of clumping. And I want to tell you a tip in here. You might say, okay, I want random values for each guide curves, not for each curves. So instead of the curve index, I want to have this guide index, but I can just bring it in here and give it to the input and make a loop like this. So before making your guide, in this node you can use the guides and create guide index map. You can create it in here, and we have the exact parameters like this one, and we have my guide index in here. You can connect this guide index to this one and also to this ID, but I don't need that right now. Okay, in here let me increase the density to 8,000 to 80,000. Now this is my rug, you can see, let me check. Okay, in here we have our procedural rug, and I can go and simply change the picture. Let me show you. Going to the plane, open new picture, this one, and also going to the curves. Let me reduce this density to have a better performance. Set this to 0.1, and going to the first one. Since I loaded, I want to change the picture. And you can see it's changing the dimensions of my plane and curves to be proportional to my image. Now let me turn it off. I need to also change the image in the shader. Okay, I think that's it. Now let me increase it again. Okay, you can see here is my new rug just by changing the image. And thank you guys for watching the video. If you liked the video, please hit the like button, and I hope you have a nice life, and goodbye friends.